All right, guys. Thanks for watching here. Wanted to give kind of a recap review, whatever you want to call it, of a couple of AR classes now that I've had the chance to go through here. So, quick background: I've been working with ARs as a career, I guess, since about 2008. Started taking some training classes back then too, really on use. So marksmanship and tactics. And since about 2010 or so, I've been working with kind of professional end users at the agency level for the adoption of rifles and their use. So how they work with accessories. How they work with suppressors, barrel lengths, optics, ammunition, all that stuff has been my day to day for some time. So in the last several years, I've been through the Sons of Liberty Armor class several times now. Learned more in that class than the 8 or 10 or however many years it was before I took it prior combined. And then more recently, just took a School of the American Rifle. I believe it's called the Master Build class. And learned a lot more there too. So wanted to give a little bit of feedback, having been through both, as you guys are maybe considering taking one or both, or figuring out which to take first. So honestly, the what I'm going to say at the end is that if you've got the time and the ability and the motivation to really learn about the rifles, you're going to want to take both. But for the reasons I'm going to get into kind of in the rest of the video, I'd probably recommend taking the Sons of Liberty class first. So there's kind of a reason that I say that. And what it comes down to is really the perspective that each of the two outfits have. And it's related to what they do in the industry, right? So Sons of Liberty, being a manufacturer, is building tens or hundreds of thousands of guns. They're sourcing components from the best manufacturers they can find for each of those particular items, and assembling them into something that wears their name on it with the lifetime warranty that they offer, and that needs to not let their customer down and not devalue their brand. So they're very much looking at things from a materials and assembly standpoint. Hey, what can you do really to kind of get the best combination of components to make sure that your gun runs, and so they're sharing that information, right? So the Sons of Liberty classes, it kind of starts out going heavy into the history and the developmental timeline of the AR-15 and into the M4 and the Mark 18 and into what it is today. And so having that backdrop of, hey, how did we get to where we are now, I think is incredibly relevant to maybe understanding some of the things that you see out there, and understanding the context of all the different parts and accessories and things that you might see. And what does somebody mean by an F-marked front sight base, for example, or things like that. So the Sons of Liberty class, history, development, nomenclature, all the different parts, and the materials that those different components are made out of. So the difference between 70-75 and 60-61 aluminum, or the difference between 416 and 4150 steel, or the difference between Carpenter 158 and 9310 bolt steel. If you don't know what those things are, before you would take a School of the American Rifle class, I think you might just be, I don't know if overwhelmed is the right word, but you might not be as able to focus on more of the material as you otherwise might. So the Sons of Liberty Armorers class, I've watched folks go through that class who've been through multiple repetitions of other branded armorers classes from nationally known AR manufacturers. And the difference in the curriculum is very different than some of those classes, for example. And really, the Sons of Liberty class gets into the why. It gets into the how. And ultimately, the best way that I would summarize it is that it's it's designed to educate the consumer and what to look for in components. So when you take the Sons of Liberty Armorers class, really what you're coming away with is an understanding of what the different materials are, why a manufacturer might choose one material or the other, what the strengths and weaknesses of those different materials and methods are. And you can kind of use that to figure out if a manufacturer is trying to save money somewhere, or they're trying to maximize precision instead of durability, or all of these different things, right? So having that, the understanding of what the different items are, what they're made out of, how they're made, things like that, really elevates your knowledge as a consumer, and hopefully allows you to make a more informed choice about what you go out and spend your money on, and what gives you the best chance of delivering the performance that you're after. Whatever that metric is, whether that's select fire, suppress durability, or it's maximum precision at distance, or it's the widest variety of ammo being acceptable to run in a gun, the widest operational envelope that you can get, and really you're learning the core of the why behind what makes the gun work. How do all of these components really work together? And so the Sons of Liberty Armorers class is phenomenal in that respect. So a lot of the branded armorers classes are going to tell you, hey, here's how to service our gun. They're not telling you why they chose this barrel steel versus that barrel steel, or why they decide to batch test a bolt instead of individually test a bolt. And so while you might understand how to replace an ejector, or how to replace a front sight post, or whatever that thing is you might learn in a branded class, you're probably not getting the unvarnished truth of what went into the manufacturer choosing a particular item. And you really do get that with Sons of Liberty. And the Sons of Liberty class is not a hard push on their brand. It's a hard push on the standards that they hold themselves to. And that applies to more manufacturers than just them. And they'll tell you that in the class. Like, hey, if you're not going to buy this part from us, then look at so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And so because of that, there's going to be a little bit more advice, I would say, in terms of, what some trusted suppliers of different components might be. So that's the kind of an overview, I would say, of your takeaway from the Sons of Liberty class. Now, you tear a rifle down as far as you want to take it. I mean, you're not taking a barrel extension off of a barrel, but I mean the barrel out of the receiver, the gas block off of the barrel, anything that you pretty much want to take apart in that class, you can do. And deficiencies that you identify, you'll be able to probably swap out components on the spot, as long as their toolkit has enough stuff in it. Probably be able to swap that stuff out on the spot and make improvements and corrections to what otherwise might be a deficiency in your rifle. So it's absolutely a hands-on class. It's absolutely a fire hose of information for most people, and I recommend it a ton. So that brings me into the School of the American Rifle class. And so the School of the American Rifle class, Chad starts off the class by saying straight up, hey, look, this class is really the intersection of armorer's work and gunsmithing. And to take a second to kind of explain that, gunsmithing, we can kind of loosely define as modifying components so that they work together, right? So a gunsmith might get a piece of wood, right, and refinish that wood, or cut that wood, or drill that wood in order to fit an action and stuff like that. So you're taking a material and you're changing the dimensions of it, or you're changing the finish of it, or whatever it is, to get to the end result that you're after. And armor is basically taking components, presumably inspecting them to make sure that they're what they're supposed to be, and assembling them with proper techniques. So that's kind of one of the core differences. Is the School of the American Rifle perspective, Chad's background, really what I think it's suited to is taking a look at this one gun that you've got in front of you, and it's like, okay, how do you potentially improve that one gun? So without having a bucket full of parts, or hopefully not going out and buying a whole lot of replacement, it's kind of looking for how do those components work with each other, and is there something that you can do to improve the harmony of those two parts, more than two parts, right? The harmony of the parts together. So ultimately, you know, like in the Sons of Liberty class, you know, if you're you know, if you come across a component that's not fitting properly, Mike's and the Sons of Liberty staff will tell you, hey, send that thing back, right? If a manufacturer turned out a part that isn't what it's supposed to be, make them pay for it. Make them replace it. Make them learn the lesson that they sent you something that is incorrect. If they weren't aware that they had a problem, now they are, and give them the chance to swap it out. You know, it shouldn't really be your responsibility to correct their deficiencies. The School of the American Rifle class, you're looking a little bit more on, hey, is there a way that you can improve this? Or how can you check what the problem may or may not be? So to give you an example, right, if you have two parts that are fitting together a little bit sloppy, if you're only looking at those two parts, you might not know if one part's a little bit too big or the other part is a little bit too small. At the end of the day, it's how those components pretty much work with each other that matters. It doesn't always matter if one part is oversized if it's fitting with something that is also oversized. So that's, I think, kind of where some of the gauging stuff comes in, right? Is to try and identify with this one singular piece, this one singular example, hey, is this part oversized or is that part undersized, right? So you're trying to identify the culprit if you do perceive something not going together the way that it should. You know, something too short, is something too long, is something too big, is something too small. That's really where the gauges are coming in, and I think that some folks might have a misunderstanding of kind of the role of the gauges if you're just coming from watching some YouTube videos of a component being inspected with gauges, because I know I did, right? So I think a lot of folks might not understand, you know, until you take the class, really, is that it's the harmony of those parts together that matter. And so it's not particularly relevant if something is oversized or undersized. Like I said, if it mates up well with the item that it's designed to mate with. So in the School of the American Rifle class, you know, you're not going through all of these individual gauges to measure each and every single individual component. You've got a rifle that you're building, or a pistol, or, you know, you've got an AR on your bench that you're building, and it's how do those things go together that you're checking to see. You know, how does your bolt carrier group actually work in your lower receiver and your buffer tube? You don't have to measure it, you just have to put the components together and see what happens. You know, inspect it once they're together. The raw measurements aren't the determiner of whether you're going to have a good finished product or not. It's like I said, it's the harmony of those components. So the School of the American Rifle class, it's a long class. You know, you're putting in 12-hour days. You're basically getting 3 days worth of paid instruction time in 2 days. So the days are long. It's a lot of information, and it's pretty much hands-on right out of the gate. There's a lot of work that you're doing. There's a lot of, hey, how do I inspect this? What am I looking for here? You know, passing around deficient components. And so there's not a whole lot of time spent looking at, you know, videos and history and slides and stuff like that. You're moving along pretty quick. So that's just to revisit on it, I guess, you know, the perspective that each of the two companies have, you know, School of the American Rifle and Sons of Liberty, is it's guided by their position in the industry, right? A gunsmith is looking at, hey, how do I make one gun the best? And Sons of Liberty is being open about, hey, how do we make 10,000 guns the same, right? And that's something that Mike's talked about in class a couple of times. Hey, if we were just making the components for ourselves and we weren't selling them to other people, there might be some things that we might do differently. But because Sons of Liberty is supplying barrels to work in other people's upper receivers than just their own, or they're supplying gas blocks to work with other people's barrels and not just their own, or bolt carrier groups to work with other people's gas systems and not just their own. The parts have to be designed with kind of that in mind. And so the School of the American Rifle perspective, I think, is starting to teach you some of the things that you can do maybe to optimize one set of components around the remaining components. And so where the time is spent is just going to be a little bit different. So yeah, it's the context that you're going to get from both classes is really, hey, how do all of these items work together? The Sons of Liberty perspective is a little bit more is, hey, if it's broke, send it back, instead of, hey, eat this blem part, or here's how what you can do to grind away a burr or something like that. That's really one of the core differences, I would say. So the other thing that I would say is that I think some folks have seen some of the videos and some of the methodology and stuff like that espoused by School of the American Rifle, and said like, hey, look, I'm just going to buy from a high-end manufacturer, and therefore I don't need to know how to do X, Y, or Z, or measure X, Y, or Z. And you might be right, but honestly, I think all of us who are frequently handling guns that have been built since COVID really kicked off have seen a perceivable drop in quality. I know I've seen more stuff with blems and out of tolerance things, but holes drilled in the wrong position, stuff that's undersized, really just from everybody, right? No one has been exempt from it. And so there's a lot of value in understanding how those things are supposed to look, or how those things are supposed to together. It doesn't mean that you need to have a digital micrometer, or that you need to have 16 different plug gauges to measure something. It means that you should kind of know what good ejection looks like in a rifle and what bad ejection looks like. And if you're really, trying to troubleshoot exactly what's going on with this one rifle that seems to have this problem, and you've switched the bolt carrier group out and it's still having that one problem, okay, well, there's kind of where having some of those inspection tools might become handy for you. But I think the important thing is to be realistic about what you're trying to do, right? Are you trying to professionally service guns for people, and you want to be able to on the spot diagnose anything immediately? Or do you want to be knowledgeable enough to know when your shit's broke and you just need to pick up the phone and get a call tag? And so the SOTAR class, you're going to learn a lot more about the little intricacies of how to improve things, how to modify components, how to use some different chemicals and tricks to improve the fits of things together, and what some arguably like incremental improvements could be. Like I said, the Sons class is really, they're teaching what they do to try and make sure that they can ship 10,000 guns that all work. So what's tried, what's proven, what do we know is a formula that works really well. And then the School of the American Rifle class it's kind of like, hey man, if you want to spend a couple of hours working on something, here's maybe what you could do to make it better. So hopefully that illuminates a little bit of perspective about the different classes and why you're seeing probably different takeaways from those classes. The Sons of Liberty class, it's on average about 20 people in a class. You've got 2 instructors, about 8-hour days, and most of the time, people, when they're first time through it, they've got that wide-eyed like, holy hell, I had no idea there was this much information that we didn't know. Everybody gets through all of the steps of the class before it is over. Like, it's a complete class. Everybody that I've ever talked to comes away, you know, incredibly impressed and feeling like they absolutely got their money's worth. School of the American Rifle, you know, it's you're doing the hands-on, you're just taking it further. You know, it's a 5-to-1 ratio. You've got your own complete bench of tools. There are things that you can try. You don't have to try, but you're there with the opportunity to try it with somebody kind of holding your hand, so to speak, you know, or willing to do it for you if you're nervous about doing it. But seeing some things done, you know, from inches away while it's being explained to you, you know, can definitely make you feel a lot more confident, maybe to try some of those things on your own. So I hope that kind of explains maybe the difference between the two, and maybe it helps you make a decision about, you know, which class is a better fit for your needs. And it could just be both. I mean, honestly, if you're curious to continue learning and to continue digging deeper, and just to be a sponge for information, then both is absolutely the right answer. But you know, for me, having gone through the Sons of Liberty class multiple times, I mean, the second time I took that class, I was still learning things that I missed the first time, probably because my brain was saturated, you know, the first time, because there is just a ton of information in it. But I think that having that class, or a class like it, right, having that knowledge before you go to the School of the American Rifle class, I think is going to free you up so that maybe you're mentally a little bit less occupied about, you know, well, hey, what did he just mean by stainless versus carbon steel? Or I think your brain's going to be processing a little bit less, and you can focus a little bit more on the techniques, and the methodology, and some of that raw data, some of the material strengths and stuff like that. You know, if you've got all that kind of filed away already, then I think you'll be poised to learn more from the School of the American Rifle class. Now, at the same time, what I'll say is that I think I'm the only one in that class that had the Sons of Liberty class before I went to the School of the American Rifle class, and none of those students had an issue keeping up and completing the material. Everybody got probably just as much out of it as I did. Everybody built a gun that ran just as good as we did there too. So it is by no means a requirement, but that's kind of what I would say. You know, if you already know the gas port sizes for different barrel lengths, if you already know, you know, who Eugene Stoner and Jim Sullivan are, if you know, the material strengths and advantages of 6061 versus 7075, if you know, the torque value for gas key set screws versus gas block set screws versus GI barrel nuts versus aluminum barrel nuts versus castle nuts, then yeah, you'll be well versed and ready to jump into that School of the American Rifle class and take off running. But I also think that the material, the industry knowledge, kind of how things work, from a supplier, from a manufacturing standpoint, that you're going to get from Sons of Liberty, still is worth going and taking that class, even after you've taken a School of the American Rifle class. Sons of Liberty kind of started something, I would say, or popularized it anyway, where they're proud of the suppliers that they get items from. And they tell you, hey, look, this is where we get our bolts from. This is where we get our springs from. This is where we get our barrels from. And a lot of manufacturers for a long time, and most still today, don't tell you that stuff. They're keeping it classified, presumably because it's not something that they're proud of. Sons of Liberty was very, very transparent in kind of getting that ball rolling in terms of saying, like, hey, look, these folks make the best bolt carrier, and that's why we buy our bolts from them. This is the best material for receiver extension. This is why we use it. This is what we feel is the best castle nut, and that's why we put it on. And they're sharing all of the things that are out there. Really does a phenomenal job of elevating the knowledge of the consumer. And there's a lot to be said for that. And their perspective of dealing with suppliers and dealing with the competition and looking at the competitor's rifle over large sample sizes, is really helpful, relevant information. So that industry knowledge, probably alone is worth the price of the Sons of Liberty course too. And to kind of get into that just a little bit, which maybe this is a tangent, but who cares? I've seen a lot of folks try and throw stones at Sons of Liberty and say like, oh, all you guys are doing is assembling a gun that other people have built. They've machined the components for. If someone's making that statement, it's pretty clear that they don't know much about how this industry works, because effectively every company does that. It would be incredibly arrogant to presume that a company could have the brightest, most talented and skilled people that know how to make rifle barrels under the same roof as the most talented and skilled and experienced people that know how to make wire springs, under the same roof of people that know how to run a CNC machine to mill 7075 T6 aluminum, next to the same people that know where to source tungsten for H buffers from, who can turn out the rubber that goes on the end of the buffer itself that impacts the... Do you see where I'm going with this? Like, Ferrari makes a really good car. Have you ever seen Ferrari make a tire? You really need to kind of look at each component. It's a different manufacturing process. It's a different sourcing process. It's a different set of experience that goes into knowing how to make each of those components, and trusting shops that specialize in just that to provide those to you is really how you get the best items that are out there. I mean, if you look at anyone's high-end anything, if you look at high-end bicycles, people are always buying, different tires and different brakes and different pedals and everything from different suppliers to kind of get what they think is the best thing. A stock, everything made by one company. I don't think you really see that particularly in high-end things, with rare exception. So Sons of Liberty being transparent about that and talking to you about what they shop for, what they specify in terms of their QC, what the materials have to do at their inspection level. You're learning a lot about where other shops probably get their stuff from, what other shops are or are not doing. And like I said, that comes back to elevating the knowledge of the consumer and advising them on how to spend their money based upon what it is that they expect the gun to do. So, I'll give you an example. So in that class, first time through the Sons of Liberty Armor class, Mike was talking about the bolt carrier group. It's something they spend a lot of time on, and how critical that is. It's kind of the heartbeat of the gun. And so their method for assembling a bolt carrier group is using grade 8 fasteners on their bolt carrier group, torquing those gas keys to 58 inch-pounds, properly staking them into the sides. It's a chrome line phosphated bolt carrier group, phosphate holding more lube. And I'm skipping over things, right? But this is the recipe that they've decided to stake their reputation on. But they're not so arrogant to not tell you about other coatings that are out there and other fasteners that are out there and other methodology that it's out there. And so in that class, they were talking about how Ned Christensen at M Guns came up with what he calls the optimized carrier key screws, the OCKS screws. So those are a screw that it's kind of like a I talk about like how it's like a off-road tire, like a mud tire, where it's got those really knobby kind of heads on it for traction, versus the mil-spec grade 8 fastener. Either one of these is more than capable of holding when properly torqued and properly staked. But these screws are just kind of that belt and suspenders approach, where you've got a little bit more engagement with the displaced metal going into the side of it. So when we talked to Sons of Liberty, they were willing to make our bolt for us with those carrier key screws. So that was something that, I became aware of because of the Sons of Liberty Armorers class, because of Mike talking about it. Even though it's not something that they do on their guns, they're like, hey, you know what? This is a really cool component. Same thing with bolt seals. They talk about Aramount 100 steel and some of the manufacturers that use that, and how it arguably might be a better steel. It's just a hell of a lot more expensive. And if that's not your application for it, then, Do you need to spend the money? Well, that's up to you. You know, something that we learned from school, the American Rifle, and Chad freely sharing that information, was how the orientation of the cam pin being consistent can affect the wear of that cam pin throughout its lifespan. So because of that, you know, we took the opportunity to put a little laser etching. We throw a logo on there. This is the first run of it, so that you can be sure that when that carrier, that cam pin is reinserted, is that it's always facing the same way. What that means is that as it travels against the side of the bolt, you know, as it goes through that path, that all of that force is occurring on one side and not one side and then the next, and opening up the tolerances and wear a little bit faster and getting that looser, which then, you know, if something's loose, it kind of bumps into something stronger, your wear's faster, it's less smooth. So, you know, we've learned things and incorporated things from both schools of thought, both SOTAR and SOLGW, and they're really doing the best job that I know of getting the knowledge out there to the student. So ultimately, I can't recommend either enough. If you're a little bit newer to things and you're looking for the broader view understanding of materials in the industry and the history and how we kind of got to where we are, I do think that the Sons of Liberty class is probably would probably benefit you to do that one first. And if you're kind of there already, you kind of know most of that stuff, and you've got the opportunity to take the SOTAR class first, then, you know, go for it. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful to you guys. Can kind of explain some of what you might see out there. You know, at the end of the day, you know, what I took away is that both Sons of Liberty and School of the American Rifle, they're after the same thing. They're after, they're sharing an undeniable passion with their students, to teach them as much as possible during the time that's there. And both of those schools are, you know, they'll stay late and talk to you as long as you want to, you know, to share that passion that they have with the platform. Their goal is the same. How do we make these rifles the best that we possibly can? Their perspective's just different, right? The perspective of one gun on the bench at a time versus, you know, hey, you're a department armor for your 30 guns, or, you know, this is how our staff builds, you know, 12 guns a day or whatever the number is, right? So the perspective influences a little bit of the lesson, of the methodology, but you know, the end goal is the same. The end goal is, how do you get your gun to be as perfectly reliable as is mechanically possible, and you're going to get your money's worth and more out of either. So hopefully you found that useful, and if you weren't thinking about taking one of those classes before, hopefully you do now, because it's definitely it can definitely be a money saver in terms of knowing what to avoid buying, not making the mistakes of investing in things that maybe you shouldn't. You think about what ammo costs these days and what it costs to diagnose, you know, a problem that you might have with a gun that's acting up. You know, having the book smart rather than having to teach yourself that lesson, you know, one range trip of 50 rounds at a time, you know, a couple of times over. You know, consider taking the class and learning from some of the legitimate experts of our time, and getting that knowledge from them. So that's all I got. Hit me up with questions if you want to. Comment below if you would. Share if you found this interesting. But this is going to be kind of a long-winded explanation, and hopefully the video format is a little bit kind of easier to listen to in the background, maybe while you're doing something else, than me having to try and type this and you having to try and read it. So yeah, thanks for tuning in.